Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. My name is Saeeduddin Faridi. I'm a research analyst here, and I will be your host for today's episode, which looks at connectivity between China and Nepal. China is Nepal's neighbor in the north, and the two countries have had close relations since diplomatic ties were established in 1955. Among the important areas of cooperation which have evolved over the years, infrastructure and connectivity have emerged as critical sectors. China has been engaged in the development of hydropower dams in Nepal, road projects like the Kathmandu Ring Road, and the construction of an international airport at Pokhra. There are further negotiations ongoing along other projects of electricity connectivity, roadways, and to discuss these developments in connectivity and infrastructure, we have with us Dr. Puspa Sharma, visiting research fellow at ISAS. Dr. Sharma, thank you for joining us for the podcast today.
Thank you, Said.
I would like to begin with more of a context-setting question. So what are some of the new developments in the Nepal-China bilateral relationship? You can probably talk about something off the heels of the foreign minister's recent visit to China. And what are some of the projects which are ongoing that China and Nepal are building together?
Thank you, Said. As you rightly said, when we talk about the new developments that are taking place, perhaps the best reference would be Nepal's foreign minister's recent visit to China last month, actually. And they discussed a number of issues. And the most important of them most of the issues that were discussed related to infrastructure and connectivity. And connectivity in the broad sense is not just physical connectivity. It's also about people-to-people connectivity. And we also saw a recent new development in the sense that one of the issues that was discussed was about Nepal requesting for visa waiver for Nepali nationals visiting China as a reciprocal kind of an arrangement. Because since 2016, Nepal has waived visa fees for Chinese nationals visiting Nepal. Nepal had requested for the same. And very recently, only a few days ago, China has accepted this request, and now it will be allowing Nepali nationals visiting China waiving the visa fee. So that's a new development in terms of connecting the peoples of the two countries, right? But then there were also other requests that Nepal has made. One of them was about opening the 14 traditional border points between the two countries. Now, as you know, there is a 1,414 kilometer long border between Nepal and China. And when we say China, of course, China is a very, very large country. The province that is near Nepal is Tibet. So this whole border would be along the Tibet-Nepal line, right? So there are people who are living in the high Himalayas close to these border points. So only having a few border points, crossings between Nepal and China is difficult for the people living in the different parts of the Himalayan region. So Nepal wants China to open up the traditional border points. Traditional in the sense that these border points used to be open years back. But after COVID, all of them had been shut. Also the ones that were functioning. Last year, China opened 4, and these are important from the perspective of the overland trade between Nepal and China. So there has been no progress as such, but Nepal has requested and hopeful that China might, go on opening these border points. So that's another one. Similarly, Nepal has proposed the development of an trade and economic corridor linking Nepal with 3 provinces in China: Chongqing, Tibet, and Sichuan. So these are the 3 provinces that Nepal wants China to, develop through a corridor. And there are also other plans. The other important one is the finalization of the BRI implementation plan, because BRI has been stuck since 2017 that Nepal signed onto the BRI. It's not moving forward. So the BRI implementation plan needs to be finalized. And there were also discussions about running a direct bus service between Kathmandu and Lhasa. That's the capital of the Tibet Autonomous Region. So a number of proposals were put up by Nepal's foreign minister, and Nepal is hopeful that these will translate into concrete outcomes on the ground. In terms of the projects, as you asked about what's going on in Nepal, a number of projects, as you also highlighted in your opening remarks, that China is engaged in many infrastructure projects like the Kathmandu Ring Road. Phase 1 was complete, now going on to Phase 2. Similarly, another road connecting two major cities in the west of Kathmandu. There are also many hydropower projects that China is engaged in. Similarly, there are these regular visits by the two sides, especially to look at the prospect of enhancing trade between Nepal and the provinces which are very close to Nepal actually. A number of projects that are going on, but also there are issues with some of the projects not moving forward as expected, delays in some of the constructions, and because of the politics that we often see at play, there are concerns about whether there are questions on whether these are real concerns in terms of the delays of only one country taking the projects, or whether it's a natural kind of a thing that's going on in the country.
Right. Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. And I want to pick up on a couple of points from what you said. And one of the things you mentioned was the Belt and Road Initiative, and how Nepal and China signed a memorandum of understanding in 2017. However, there are no active projects under the BRI umbrella, which are currently active in Nepal. So perhaps maybe you can highlight what are some of the reasons for that.
Sure, yes. Nepal signed onto the BRI 2017. But there is not a single project under the BRI umbrella as such. Although at times what we have seen is that some of the ongoing projects have been labeled as BRI project. One example is the Pokhra International Airport that was built with China's support. So right just before the inauguration of this airport, the Chinese ambassador to Nepal said that this is a BRI flagship project in Nepal, which the Nepali authority later denied, because according to the Nepali authorities, for a project to be a BRI project, both sides have to agree to it. There has to be, an agreement that both sides have to have signed onto it. Then it becomes a BRI project. Therefore, many of these projects that China is engaged in could be BRI projects, but in terms of the agreement that has not taken place between the two countries, and the truth that the BRI implementation plan is being worked upon, it's not being finalized yet. China had prepared one and then shared with Nepal in 2019, but this has not been finalized yet for many different reasons. So until this plan is finalized, until there is an agreement, Nepal is not ready to say that any of the project that is ongoing at the moment is BRI project. Why? Why has this not taken forward is, I think, a good question. I think the most important reason has been the issue behind whether BRI projects in Nepal would be implemented as grants or through loans. Because, you see, under BRI, Nepal initially had proposed 35 projects, and then it later on reduced it to 9, because China said that 35 projects are too many. I suppose that initially Nepal might have thought, or the Nepali authority might have thought, that the projects under the BRI might come as Chinese grant. Therefore, they might have gone with 35 projects. Why not, take all these important projects if China is giving it? And then they later reduce it to 9. But still, I think the whole idea is, if China would give grants to implement BRI projects, because Nepal will not be in a position to take loans for mega projects as such. For example, the China-Nepal cross-border railway, right, which is one of the most talked about project so far. So concern about whether China will provide grants to implement the BRI project, and the reality that so far as we have seen in other countries that China doesn't provide grant for BRI project, right? It's the loans that China provides. So until the BRI implementation plan is finalized, which might then perhaps make it clear whether the projects that will come in will be through grants or loans, even if loans, whether they are soft loans or commercial loans. The lack of that clarity perhaps is the reason why BRI, projects are not moving forward. But what I don't understand is if the projects under the BRI would be similar to the projects that are already on the ground in terms of, say, commercial loans or soft loans, whatever, then what will be the difference about having a BRI project and a non-BRI project? Perhaps that clarity is not there. And because that clarity is not there until the plan will be finalized, perhaps BRI will not move forward. And that perhaps is the reason why, BRI projects are not moving forward in Nepal.
Mm-hmm. Those are some really interesting points. I feel like BRI politics in Nepal should be its own case study, which can be looked at.
Indeed.
In your first answer, you also mentioned trade and economic corridors with reference to 3 Chinese provinces. Now, subnational diplomacy within Chinese provinces, especially alluding to BRI projects, is not unheard of. And there is this peripheral diplomacy idea of within Chinese diplomacy. So I was wondering how you see Nepal working with China's peripheral diplomacy.
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, see, Nepal has a consulate general office in Lhasa. And this is not new. This has been, centuries old, you may say. I mean, like it's traditionally, we have got a consulate general office in Lhasa. And Tibet being the province, that is joined with Nepal, many of Nepal's trade happens with Tibet or say the other closer provinces. Not to say that Nepal doesn't trade with mainland China through the coastal areas, of course it does. But most of Nepal's exports, which are like small in volume comparatively, are overland. They go overland through the land border into these provincial regions. In terms of Nepal's import from China, almost a quarter of Nepal's imports come through overland from these provinces, and the rest by the sea route, that is from China's coastal areas to Indian ports, and then from there by land to Kathmandu and other parts. So in that sense, these peripheral regions, or say the provinces which are closer to Nepal, are very important. Not only for trade, also perhaps to attract investment, right? Because the private sectors, the governments, the provincial governments in China, which are close to Nepal, are interested. So what we have seen is that, and this has actually increased in recent years, many of the Nepali politicians, whenever they visit China, they do not fail to visit these provinces actually. So the last month when Nepal's foreign minister also visited China, he visited these 3 provinces, met the leaders over there, had the discussion. So that has been the case with every Nepali politician. Whenever they visit China, they visit these provinces, and there have been very high-level visits from these provinces to Nepal also in recent years. So that kind of engagement has been going on. So perhaps, China feels that the relationship between the 2 countries might be strengthened if this kind of sub-diplomacy could be strengthened in the first place because of the very close economic, trade and other ties between these provinces and Nepal. So that's how it has been going on.
Thank you for that answer. And I want to switch perspectives now a little bit and talk about what kind of hopes and aspirations do people in Nepal regard with their country's relationship with China.
Well, I mean, sitting between 2 large neighbors, India and China, I think the common Nepali people do have very high hopes, high aspirations from both the countries, right? Because now these are emerging economies doing really very well in all the sectors. So Nepali people, they hope, or say they aspire, great support from China in terms of improving connectivity. in terms of China's support in many sectors, which already has been taking place. And in recent years, that has also gone up. For example, many Nepali students now go to China for higher education, unlike what it used to be earlier. Also because there are many good Chinese universities now, globally, if we see. And China, I think, provides a maximum of 100 scholarships every year to Nepali students to study in China. So that would be the soft part of things, where Nepal is gaining, where Nepal is benefiting from China. And Nepali people hope that this kind of support will go further. China has also supported Nepal in terms of building schools, renovating old heritage sites in schools and others, building hospitals, which means China is engaged in several sectors, not just only infrastructure connectivity, but also in the social areas of education, health, and all that. So Nepali people's aspiration is that Nepal, holds a balance between the two great powers, tries to gain maximum out of these two powers, also in terms of navigating their markets, which itself is so big, right? Although Nepal has not been able to make the most of these huge markets. I mean, there has been there in the literature and in the studies that Nepal should not only be looking at its own market. For Nepal, these two big countries are, infinite kind of a market, but Nepal has not been able to make use of that, and Nepali people aspire. They hope that they can make use of that. So that would again be people's hopes. But the main thing is, Nepali people perhaps do not want Nepal's political leaders to be seen as siding with one side against the other. Rather, they expect the Nepali political leadership to maintain that balance so that Nepal can benefit from the rise of both China and India in a similar way, in a balanced manner.
You brought in Nepal's neighbor to the south as well, India, and how people expect their leaders to make the best of the situation for Nepal and work with both their neighbors. How do you see that geopolitical competition, which eventually happens when India and China are engaged anywhere? How do you see that playing out on the ground in Nepal? And how is Nepal basically balancing this tightrope?
That's a good question, an important one. As you said, I mean, wherever India and China are involved, there are geopolitical tensions, and that we see most, evidently that is there in South Asia, in many countries, right? And Nepal, which is between the two countries, more so, right? So there is a competition for influence, definitely. As I said earlier, also I had referred to many of the projects, like hydroelectricity projects, from which China withdrew later on. A reason is that India had strategically said that Nepal will not buy electricity in which China is involved in any way, whether in construction, whether in investment, right, in any way. So that was a reason why Chinese investments in the hydropower sector were withdrawn, and we are not seeing Chinese investment coming in. Whereas for Nepal, Nepal wants to balance, diversification is good in every sense, in every way, whether it's about your trade routes, whether it's about your economy in general, right? Whether it's about having investment in any particular sector. Nepal wants that. But because of, one example, because of India's strategic move, we don't see that happening. So that's one example of how the geopolitics is there. And of course, when we look at the political parties, it's not a very, obvious, but we do see things playing out in a way that when one or a certain political party forms a government, one country perhaps feels comfortable than the other, because the relationship that the political parties have with the government in either country, and historically, what we have seen, is a reason that they feel more comfortable. And sometimes we also see this happening publicly in terms of their public, in the public discourse, how it comes. So these things are there. But the important thing is the two big countries which do have their own interests and might want to have this influence in Nepal, it is on Nepal to a large extent about how it navigates and tries to balance the geopolitics of these two countries on the ground. And what I see is, in that sense, perhaps Nepal lacks a common foreign policy that can be adopted by whichever party comes in the government in terms of the relationship that Nepal wants to have with either country. That perhaps is lacking, that we don't see, and therefore the Nepali political leaders themselves are giving this opportunity to the foreign powers in terms of how they would want to play with. Play might not be a good word, but how they would want to engage with certain sections in Nepal and have their influence more than the other. So that is perhaps an issue that everyone in Nepal actually is concerned with in terms of the real need of balancing the two countries and making use of these two emerging powers to Nepal's benefit.
I think that's a really important takeaway from this, of having some continuities in foreign policy to balance two powerful and developing neighbors for small states. Dr. Puspa, thank you so much for joining us today and for this really insightful conversation. I'm sure our listeners will find this very enriching.
Thank you, Saeed. Pleasure speaking to you.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. You can learn more about our work at isas.nus.edu.sg. For updates on our publications and events, you can find us on social media. We are available on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.